the check valve service procedure. Remove the high pressure cylinder, filler tube, compression ring, inlet poppet, and spring from the pump, being careful not to drop the filler tube, inlet poppet, and springs. Take care not to damage the guide sleeve during this procedure. On a workbench, remove the O-ring, filler tube, compression spring, and inlet poppet and spring from the cylinder. Clean the parts using solvent and compressed air. Inspect the parts for cracks and erosion, replace as needed. Additionally, measure the filler tube sleeve. If the length of the sleeve is shorter than 668 thousandths of an inch or longer than 672 thousandths of an inch, replace the sleeve. Replace the guide sleeve onto the high pressure cylinder. If the major procedure is being performed, replace the sleeve. Lubricate the O-ring with white food grade O-ring lubricant and install it into the groove on the outside of the high pressure cylinder. Insert the filler tube and compression spring into the high pressure cylinder. Set the cylinder assembly aside. It will be installed after servicing the dynamic seal and bearings. Remove the seal carrier. The dynamic and rod seals will come out with it. Remove the dynamic and rod seals from the seal carrier and discard. Clean the seal carrier with compressed air only. Using solvent on the bearings will damage them. Inspect all parts for signs of wear, erosion, and cracks, and replace as needed. Ensure to check the cooling water ports for blockage. Look for signs of plunger wear or rubbing on the installed bearing of the seal carrier. Install the dynamic and lip seal into the clean seal carrier. Anytime a dynamic seal has been changed, the bearing should be inspected as well. Remove the subplate adapter from the pump. Clean the subplate adapter using compressed air. Inspect the subplate adapter looking for scratches or erosion. Also check the cooling water ports for blockage. Replace if needed. Inspect the bearing looking for chips, cracks, or erosion. If the seal carrier shows signs that the plunger was rubbing against it, then the bearing is worn. Replace the bearings, seal carrier, and plunger if damaged. Flow International also recommends plunger replacement if it appears damaged or the seal life is noticeably decreased. If the plunger does not appear to be damaged, continue with the subplate adapter service procedure. For the major subplate adapter service, remove the snap ring, spacer, and rod seal. Save the snap ring and spacer and discard the rod seal. If plunger damage is suspected, inspect the plunger surface. If it is greatly discolored, if a flaw can be felt on the surface, or if dynamic seal life has noticeably decreased, replace it with a new one. To remove the plungers, rotate the pump by hand to bring the first plunger to full stroke. Using the plunger nut wrench, carefully remove the plunger nut, plunger, and compression spring. On a workbench, remove the plunger nut and spring from the plunger. Clean the parts with solvent and compressed air. Inspect the plunger nut for bad threads and the compression spring for cracks. Replace if needed. Slide the spring and then the plunger nut onto the plunger, being careful not to scratch the plunger surface. To install the plungers, first lubricate the threads of the plunger nut with anti-seize. Thread the plunger assembly onto the pump and torque to 20 foot-pounds using the plunger nut wrench. Now install the lip seal in the subplate adapter with the groove facing into the adapter. Replace the spacer and snap ring. Lubricate the O-ring with food-grade lubricant and install it on the subplate adapter. Slide the subplate adapters onto the plungers. Install the seal carrier assemblies onto the plungers, being careful that the dynamic seal stays in the seal carrier. Mount the high-pressure cylinders onto the pump, being sure the filler tube, inlet poppet, and compression spring stay in the cylinder. Ensure the high-pressure cylinder guide sleeve does not pinch the O-ring. Install the end caps onto the tie rods and then slide them over the O-ring on the high-pressure cylinder. Do not allow the spring force to push the end cap forward while holding the end cap seated and making sure the nylon bushings are in place. Apply anti-seize to both sides of the flat washers and threads of the tie rods. Install the washers and nuts finger tight. Install the manifold onto the end caps. Apply anti-seize to both sides of the flat washers and the threads of the manifold bolts. Install the bolts with both washers on the manifold using an initial torque of 10 foot-pounds. Hand tighten the tie rod nuts, then, one at a time and in a diagonal sequence, tighten the rod nuts 15 to 60 degrees until 165 foot-pounds is reached. Use a final torque on the manifold bolts of 70 foot-pounds, again using a diagonal pattern. Using a feeler gauge, measure the gap between the high-pressure cylinder and the subplate adapter. The gap should be within 15 thousandths of an inch between the top and bottom of each cylinder. If the difference is greater than 15 thousandths of an inch, loosen all bolts, repeat torque sequence, and remeasure until a proper gap is achieved. Connect the thermistor wires. Connect the low-pressure water hose and the high-pressure water tubing connections.
Spin the pump by hand to make sure it does not bind. Open the inlet water valve and check for low pressure water leaks. Return the pump to service following the startup instructions in the manual. The pressure control valve and external compensation valve, PCV or ECV, may require service if trouble reveals poor pressure control valve performance, if the valve fails, or if it is time to install a minor or major maintenance kit. An external leak or excessive water flowing out of the valve drain are sure signs that maintenance is required. To service the pressure control or external compensation valve, first shut down the system and place the main electrical disconnect in the off position and lock it out. Ensure pressure is bled off. Remove the air and drain lines. Now remove the valve body with air actuator attached from the high pressure manifold. Remove the two O-rings from the valve body. Discard the poppet, seat, and static seal. Using the new parts provided in the minor repair kit, first place new O-rings on the valve body and install the adapter. Ensure the new static seal is in place on the valve seat. Lightly push the poppet into the seat. Then insert the seat assembly into the end of the valve body and thread the PCV into the high pressure manifold. Torque to 190 foot-pounds. Reconnect air supply and drain lines. The valve is now ready for operation. Restart the Hyplex pump following the startup instructions in the manual. If it is time to install a major repair kit, remove the valve from the manifold using the previous procedure and place the valve on a bench. Separate the valve body from the air actuator. Remove the nylon seal and O-ring and slide out the bearing. Remove the retainer ring and disassemble the actuator. Remove and discard the piston seal. Remove the nylock nut and plunger and discard. Clean the piston, housing and cap, inspecting for damage and erosion. Install the new plunger and nylock nut, torquing the nut to 180 inch-pounds. Lubricate the new seal with silicone grease and install onto the piston with the lip of the seal facing towards the nylock nut. Install the piston into the housing with the recess end facing outward. Slide the cap over the plunger and install the retaining ring. Set the actuator aside. Install the new bearing into the body, then place the O-ring on the nylon seal and install the seal into the body, O-ring side first. Apply blue lube to the threads on the body and install into the actuator and tighten. Place new O-rings on the valve body and install the adapter. Ensure the new static seal is in place on the valve seat. Lightly push the poppet into the seat, then insert the seat assembly into the end of the valve body and thread the PCV into the high pressure manifold. Torque to 190 foot-pounds. Reconnect air and supply and drain lines. The valve is now ready for operation. Restart the Hyplex pump following the startup instructions in the manual. By learning and implementing correct operation, service, and safety procedures, your direct drive pump will provide outstanding performance. If you have any questions how to maximize that performance, please contact Flow's Technical Service Department.